Thank you very much. We can get Johannes' presentation ready. He's going to be talking about promoting green and inclusive industrial development. Thank you very much. Let's go ahead to it.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Johannes Mabela. I will be presenting promoting green and inclusive industrial development. So my bio is on the brochure. So to start with, can you go to slide 2, please? Yeah, this is the context. South Africa's industrial policy successes and challenges since 1994. Our political transition in 1994 has caused us, the country, to transition to political and economic emancipation in our country, South Africa. So much has been done. Policies in terms of economic development has been implemented, but there were challenges and problems as we saw now in our political, economic, and policy challenges. The Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, 1996, sets out here about what needs to be done in terms of the developmental stage. Section 24 of the Constitution, which is the environmental clause, talks much about sustainability, environmental sustainability and ecology, and everything that's got to do with climate change. I mean pollution. There was the Reconstruction and Development Program, that is in 1995. That is government policy in terms of growing the South African economy. And there was the year in 1996, which caused the economic stability, poverty, and job creation. It solved those problems. And ASGISA in 2007 and 8, which was a single integrated economy in terms of IPEP 1 up to IPEP 3. The new growth part was in 2010. That's not far from where we are now. And there is this NDP from 2012 that we are busy with. The South African population and from policy is busy with now. Can we get to the next slide? Promoting green and inclusive industrial development in context. This is part of the Paris Agreement in terms of climate change. Remember, this is a ratification. So South African policymakers need to be able and proactive in making sure that the ratification at the Paris Agreement are made into law and implemented at policy level, which has caused problems in terms of synergies between business, trade unions, government, and the communities. And government plan to mitigate adverse effects on climate change and to build new industries. Just transition will cause a massive destruction in unemployment. So now new industries need to be developed. New industries need to be developed from the mining, from the agriculture, and other sectors and sectors of the economy, more especially in Mpumalanga, where there is an energy hub that is going to be distracted. And just transition. And new industries are going to also be created. Green economy must create employment opportunities in order to reduce structural employment. The issue of structural unemployment can be evidenced at ESCOM and the supply chain. That is the mines that supply ESCOM with the coal, that is fossil fuel. So there will be unemployment, that is inevitable. But how the policymakers, the policymaking process must be able to make sure that there is reduction and it is balanced and managed so that the industry can be able to succeed beyond the coal economy, that the fossil fuel economy, that is the South African economy is based on now. Can you go to the next slide? Challenges promoting green and inclusive industrial development, policy coherence, because at the national level, the provincial level, and the local level, and the local level, that is the municipalities, there should be a synergy, there should be a common language, a common vision, and common planning in terms of making sure that the transition from the fossil fuel economy to the just transition, that is the clean energy, is just that it doesn't cause any structural problems in terms of unemployment, and more especially the communities of Mpumalanga, where unemployment, poverty, and inequality are evidence. Everyone knows that the Mpumalanga province is the hub of pollution. But again, Mpumalanga province, that is the Highveld region, is the energy hub of the South African economy for a long time. But the problem is when one drives around that areas, there is evidence of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And more especially, the most affected, they are women. And the value chain disruptions, the value chain, integration to regional economies, SADC and commerce and ECOWAS. When we integrate just transition or green economy development, we need to be able and to take cognizance of the fact that there is inward migration from the people from the SADC countries, where they will come into our country, South Africa, in terms of greener opportunities. This has been evidenced in when the development of coal in Mpumalanga, where people from Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi have been working around the mines as migrant workers. So the new industries will create an influx of people or employees from those countries again to come into our countries. And again, it can create unfair competition between employment, business, and any other sector of economy. And value chain disruptions. These are the value chain disruptions is from the coal mine to the power station. Lots of trucks are traveling around our road. So if maybe perhaps to put in an instance, an example, a businessman has got 15 trucks. So 15 trucks will employ 15 people. So if in just transition to green economy, we need to take much cognizance of that this can be the value chains in terms of transporting coal from the power station, from the coal mine to the power station. There are going to be disruptions, and those disruptions can cause industrial actions which are now evidenced at Mpumalanga and perhaps in Moepo. And globalization, industrial synergies, development and development world. So in terms of globalization, we are part of the global world. Everything that is happening, maybe perhaps in China or the European countries or the United States of America, it does affect that. Just transition affects the South African population and economy in Africa. But the concept of what is that translated into someone who's living in Emalahleni, that needs to be explained, and people need to understand exactly in terms of the global definition of what transition is it. It's not like maybe the South African government say, we are transitioning to the new economy, which is a green one. But someone who's in Emalahleni or Secunda, does it really understand what this is all about? What this translates into his living conditions? Because most people have been surviving in coal, in coal industry for more than 100 years. Remember, Eskom was established in 1923. From 1923, and then it's 2012 now, there is new economy, which is green industrialization. How does that mean to a person who is unemployed, people who are poor, or who have been adversely affected by the economic policies of the past? Resistance to the speed on the pace of implementation of just transition. That is an urgency. I don't think there should be that much agency and the speed in terms of the momentum to rushing into new things without having to sort out the problem policy challenges, economic policy challenges in our country. South Africa. Resistance to energy transformation and diversification. Resistance is just semantic so that people can be able to understand that there will be a resistance to the new thing, to the just transition. Hence, because this is an old industry. Fossil fuel is an old industry. So if you just transition to the new economy without having people to fully understand what is it that they're getting themselves into, it's going to cause resistance from the communities, even at the government level. It can cause resistance under deployment of sound business models to grow economy. The Eskom has just is just planning to deploy the technology readiness level project in terms of information and communication technology that will be able to assist to grow economy for the communities and all stakeholders to take part in the transition to the new economy, financialization of green energy projects. So there should be funds. Funds are available, but there should be more funds in terms of financialization of green economy projects. The effect of monopoly of Eskom, that is a common one. Eskom is a buyer and the procurer of energy in terms of generation, transmission, and distribution. So I think we need more independent power producers, and people at home, at household, needed to have means to generate their own source of energy. And the effect of regulating energy transmission distribution. NERSA is at the core the challenges of energy transition, because in terms of the licensing procedures and processes, there are problems in terms of the timing, and even more independent power producers are left out of the system and the economies of land in South Africa. That is, if one needs to develop an independent. Okay, we can go to the next slide. The markets for green energy industrialization. I think the JSE has made a sterling job in terms of a green bond market. So in terms of developing green energy projects, in terms of solar or any other part of renewable, I think it can investment from the JSE, they can be very, very, very viable in terms of growing the green economy. The IRENA, International Renewable Energy, has expertise in market research and investment in terms of research. And again, lessons can be learned from Egypt in terms of economic policy reforms, and in terms of carbon trading problems must be developed at full scale across all the sectors of the economy. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, just transition. Can you just, because of time, can you just get to another slide? Yeah, this is the challenges that the people of Mpumalanga are experiencing now. You see all these areas where the S12 of 18 power station in Mpumalanga are based. So social and fuel plant is in Secunda. So this is why the problems, South African problems are at now. So I think there should be a gradual overhaul of this system into a new system. So can you go to the next slide, please? So this is how people in Mpumalanga survive. You see, this is a woman. And then I think one of the options is just to have a green city. Remember, Johannesburg city was built on the discovery of gold. So why is it Mpumalanga did not have a city at the discovery of coal for more than 100 years? Those ghost towns, your Witbank, your Middelburg, because are all towns now. People will be adversely affected by what will be happening now. But if there can be plan in terms of investment to develop new cities in terms of green energy projects and everything, and that can be sustainable. I think people can, from reliance on the coal and into the new industries, I think that could be available. Can you go to next slides? The green economy to cut all sectors of the industry, your agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and all that communication. Can you again go to next slides? Yeah, the basic of any economy, I think it's mining plays a very pivotal role in economic development. Silica sand, which is sand, is very simple in terms of small scale mining. So even women can be able to group themselves up so that they can mine silica, which is sand, and that quartz can be made into solar plant. Is an important component of solar plants. Then that can create employment on its own. And in terms of iron ore, even iron can be able to use in terms of renewable energy project. So green hydrogen economy, that is in Northern Cape. Research, Economist has been, SARChI has been making an important part in terms of a Buchebai green hydrogen project. This is expected to employ about 6,000 permanent jobs. If that has to happen, we don't know, because this is all theory for now. And then this source is the Northern Cape green hydrogen project. 50,000 temporary jobs are also bound to happen in the green hydrogen economy in the Northern Cape. So this is the Buchebai, this is a map for the Buchebai in the Northern Cape. Can you go to the next slide? I think it's done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Next presentation, going into small businesses, quite an important component of the work. We're going to get it from Cabanga to take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Yes, I'm going to talk to you about strategy to incorporate SMMEs into the renewable energy sector. The next slide, please. This is the outline of the presentation. Can go on, sir. Yeah, there has been an increase in the uptake of renewable energy, mostly solar in South Africa, through the REAP project. More than 6.5 gigawatt of renewable energy at a total investment of 209 billion has been procured from 112 IPPs in 7 bid rounds. In the first decade of the REAP, and more than 50% of those projects are located in Northern Cape. I think about 59 of them and most of those are based on solar. However, the RIP has had the minimal impact in terms of inclusion of SMMEs into the core value chain of the renewable energy sector. Despite that, according to RIP requirements, IPPs are required to make enterprise development commitments, But alongside the RIP, there's been growth in small-scale generation of electricity. That has been encouraged by a lot of factors, including the rising cost of electricity, Eskom electricity, as long as the unreliability of supply. There also has been supportive policies, from all spheres of government in support of small-scale generation. There's also availability of finance, to finance the installation of small-scale generation in households and industrial sites. And also the technology to implement small-scale generation has been declining over time. In October in 2018, there was a renewable energy conference in Northern Cape that came with the resolution that the inclusion of small-scale, small and medium enterprises in the renewable energy industry be prioritized. And with that resolution, the Department of Economic Development and Tourism was found to be playing a critical role in terms of strategy and implementation. That's how we came to develop this paper in the department. In terms of the problem statement, SMME participation in any industry contributes to economic growth and development. In South Africa, for instance, estimates suggest that SMMEs contribute more than 90% to formal business, provide employment to around 50% of the labor force, and contribute around 50% to GDP, which is quite substantial. The main platform for renewable energy in the country is the RIP project, but SMMEs are found to be limited in that space because of limited financial resources and lack of technical and managerial capabilities. As I've mentioned, the bulk of the projects are located in the Northern Cape, and still they don't have much in terms of SMME participation. But research that has been done recently, especially from the CSIR, indicate that there are opportunities for SMMEs in the renewable industry if they focus on small-scale generation of renewable power. Against this background and with a focus on Northern Cape, this study attempts to propose a set of interventions to circumvent some of the challenges and unlock the opportunities for SMMEs. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the study approach. It's a simple one. It was a desktop review of strategic documents and related literature, and also dialogue forums with relevant stakeholders, provincial departments, government agencies, industry associations, commercial banks, and local government, just to find out how these interventions can be crafted and what support can those stakeholders can bring toward the implementation. Next slide, please. And then what is small-scale embedded generation? It is called small-scale because it involves generation facilities of less than 1 megawatt. It is embedded in the sense that it is, located at the site of consumption, where electricity is generally consumed. That's where the system is also located, unlike the conventional, electricity value chain, which is decentralized. And then this system is dominated by rooftop PV. It's PV based, even though there are some technology that can be used, but because wind technology, for instance, is more capital intensive and expensive to implement, and it's also expensive to maintain, there's preference for the PV system. And also the components for PV system is also the price, in terms of price are decreasing. It's less costly to implement, and it's easy to scale. 68 of them, they allow SSG in their territories. And 47 of those have an official application system, and 31 have got the NESA approved tariff for small-scale generation. It is a growing sector. The projection is that by 2035, there will be 7.5 gigawatt installed capacity, valued at 75 billion rand. Next slide, please. In terms of opportunities that have been identified by research, the opportunities are mainly in the installation, operation, and maintenance of the systems. There are no opportunities in manufacturing because most of the components are imported from China and then assembled locally by bigger energy companies, and then installed, and then there's some operation that is required and maintenance over time. So the opportunities that are available for SMMEs in this space is installation of the system, either as the main contractor or under subcontractor from an established firm. But in the case of the Northern Cape, we don't have established firms in this space. So most of our SMMEs that we are targeting for this opportunity will be subcontractor basis, which means that a partnership with established companies will be very key. And then there's also opportunity in the maintenance and operation post-installation. Next slide, please. These are some of the challenges that have been identified by research over time. Mainly the challenge is around capabilities. The SMMEs don't have the capabilities to operate in the space. They don't have the capital to also operate. And because the market is very new, regulation is still scanty and still being developed. So that also limits growth and the integration of smaller companies. And when it comes to installation, the industry standard insists on guarantees and warranties being provided by the installer. So that adds on to the cost, the entry cost for SMMEs, because once they do the installation, they must guarantee the quality and all that. And then in terms of manufacturing, there is no opportunity there because the capabilities does not exist locally. Next slide. So based on the identified opportunity, the challenges, we proposed some interventions that we think can actually circumvent some of the challenges, that can be coordinated by the Department of Economic Development in Northern Cape. And we say the department is well positioned to play that role, given that the SMME sector and also the renewable energy industry are priority sectors of the department. There are two programs, that are focusing on those particular sectors. So they are well placed to coordinate the intervention. The intervention is targeting two types of SMMEs. We have aspiring SMMEs that are not in business yet, but they've got a viable business concept. And we've got those entrepreneurs that are already in the space, but they're facing growth and sustainability challenges. And then we are looking at installation of rooftop solar PVs for all public buildings in the Northern Cape as an initial market, that we try to organize for these aspirant SMMEs. But there are challenges we have mentioned, and the intervention seeks to circumvent those challenges. And the identified challenges indicate that there is a need for a multi-stakeholder approach, So there is a stakeholder forum that has been set up to actually deal with some of these. Next slide, please. So these are the proposed interventions that we have come up with. The first one is to support specialized training of emerging and aspirant entrepreneurs. In this regard, we have engaged SARChI, South African Photovoltaic Industry Association, that has a training program, for aspiring SMMEs into the space. And we have organized a group of SMMEs within the province that are currently going through the training. And then the second one is to create an incentive fund and support package to stimulate entrepreneurship. In the department, we have a fund for SMMEs that has been used as a seed fund for this particular initiative. But there were challenges from other SMMEs outside renewable energy to say that, there is a bias towards renewable energy. Those are some of the challenges that came with that. And then we are formalizing partnership with industry stakeholders. SARChI, for instance, they've got SARChI, South African Renewable Energy Incubator, that is working with us towards that intervention. And we have trying to facilitate linkages with companies that are already in the space in terms of implementation of in terms of installation of the small scale embedded generation for the benefit of the smaller companies that we are trying to support. And then we also facilitating the initial market We are talking to the Department of Public Works in the province to avail all the buildings, for installation of this rooftop solar systems. That is an initial market. It's a learning space for our SMEs. It will be difficult for them to go straight to the private market as learners to actually build capabilities. So that is the interventions, and the intervention model will involve incubation, creating clusters, and also facilitating mentorship and coaching, where we are relying on the established companies. Next slide. So these are some of the stakeholders. The key stakeholders: the Department of Economic Development and Tourism and the Department of Public Works. Economic development and tourism, in terms of strategy and implementation, they are playing a role of coordinating the whole intervention, creating support packages, and also providing the state funding for the intervention that is leveraged from other sources within the provincial government and also from outside provincial government. We have other departments, through the cluster approach, we lobby and try to do policy advocacy around the importance of integrating SMEs in the renewable energy sector to garner support from other departments within the provincial department. Other stakeholders are financial institutions, commercial banks. As I've said earlier on, they are tailor-made financial products that aim at this particular type of market, small-scale generation market. We, as a department, started to talk with the banks, and the response has been positive in terms of them coming to the party, funding the process. And then industry associations, SARChI is conducting training in the Northern Cape on the identified entrepreneurs to actually qualify as installers of the small-scale systems. And then SARChI is the South African Renewable Energy Incubator. It is set up in Atlantis in the Western Cape with funding from CEDA. It also a similar initiative in terms of developing entrepreneurship around renewable energy among small-scale companies. And then the Northern Cape local municipalities, Plug municipality, they are assisting in terms of policy. They've recently developed a policy for small-scale embedded generation that is going to assist in terms of enabling the process to go forward. Next slide, please. The conclusion is that indeed, renewable energy is very difficult for small companies. It requires high capital costs. It also requires complex capabilities. However, the SSG seems to be a platform that could be viable for SMEs to participate in, to build skills and industry confidence through collaboration with medium-sized and larger companies. So collaboration is very important, to make sure that this initiative is a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cabanga, for taking us through the work that's taking place in Northern Cape. And with that, we'll move over to the last presentation of the session from Nicola, and really looking at the linkage of high employment and low carbon growth pathways in South Africa. Thank you very much. Please take us through.
Thank you so much. So I'm presenting my master's dissertation, and what I did was I was looking at mapping sectors for high employment and low carbon growth in South Africa. Next slide, please. So my problem statement here, so we know we have an unemployment crisis. The numbers are huge. If you then look even further into youth unemployment, it's even higher. But then at the same time, we have this climate crisis threat that we're dealing with, which is putting the entire world under a huge amount of pressure. So we can look at sectors separately and say, okay, this sector, it employs a lot of people, or this sector, very high carbon emissions, but putting them both together, I believe is extremely useful in terms of the narrative of a just transition, because that's what you need. You need the low carbon, you need the high employers for the future growth pathway of South Africa. So that was kind of where I wanted to fill that gap, was to quantitatively map the sectors that way. Next slide, please. So my research question then was specifically which sectors and subsectors have opportunities for high employment and low emissions growth in South Africa. and what are some policy measures that could realize this potential. Next slide, please. So what I was able to do, the end result was a 2x2 typology where you have your X and your Y axis and you have blocks. And in those 4 blocks, you have kind of your good ones that are high employment and low carbon, and then your bad would be your high carbon and your low employment. So that was the end result. And how I got that was I used data from Fiona Trogana, who we met at the beginning of the forum, as well as James Rieler. So Professor Trogana, her data was on the labor intensity of various sectors, and then James Rieler, his was on carbon emission intensity. They were disaggregated differently, so I had to do a bit of work there because, so Trogana's was into 46 sectors and Rieler was 63. So I had to group some together and disaggregate some. Then, okay, so then from that, I had this typology, which we'll see in a few slides coming up. And then I could use that to see, okay, then if we were to put some policy, can you go back one? Yeah. If you were to then put some policy measures, what would happen? So I looked specifically at a wage subsidy, carbon tax, and then the phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies. And you could see based on where the sectors lie on the typology, how those would then affect them in terms of magnitude. So with this, you can kind of see that not each individually, but together, they could potentially have an impact in terms of shifting that growth pathway to a low carbon and higher employment. Next slide, please. So looking at the wage subsidy, that would specifically, you would be incentivizing those high employment intensity companies to grow faster. And on the other hand, you know, the phasing out of the fossil fuels and the carbon tax would be more punitive and would disincentivize companies that are huge emitters from growing, or actually incentivize them to lower their carbon emissions. Next slide, please. So this is what the mapping looked like. In the next slide, don't go to the next slide yet, but you can actually see a list of all the different sectors. But you can kind of see that they're clustered where D, so you have your low carbon and then your high employment. Sorry, that's in A. Your low carbon and high employment. So that's like where you want to be. And then it isn't an exact line, but you can kind of, if you remove the outliers, you can kind of see that there's a trend where as well your high emitting sectors, so your gas, your natural gas, your electricity, they're also quite low in employment intensity. So you actually, there's this incentive to actually go towards the sectors that are higher in employment, because they're actually also oftentimes lower in carbon emissions. Next slide, please. So that's what your box looked like. So as you can see in A, you've got your clothing, catering and accommodation, forestry, furniture, leather, the whole list is there. What was quite interesting was, so your top was other producers and activities, which, so that's think, you know, hairdressers, funeral parlors, sports facilities, that sort of thing. So the actual data isn't disaggregated. You can't get it kind of disaggregated more. So that's kind of something that would be interesting to look at in the future. But it also just shows the importance of these kind of smaller, well, as the, you know, the SMMEs and your more informal kind of products and services. Next slide, please. So the end results then was your quadrant D, so that's your kind of where you want to see slower growth, would be gas, natural gas, specifically, and then electricity. Your quadrant A, where you've got, you know, you want to see faster growth to reach this low carbon growth pathway, would be your clothing, leather, footwear, catering and accommodation, forestry, furniture, wood and other wood products, food, motor vehicles, parts and accessories, and and then the list carries on. And then also, if you go on to the next slide, so quadrant B, they're not, obviously it's not good, as good as the quadrant A, but it was quite interesting because if you remember the bottom right hand corner, they were, if you looked at their employment intensities, they were just below the threshold of being in A. So they're also pretty good ones. So the kind of significant three were textiles, agriculture, and fishing there. Then your C is your, was your top left. So they are high employment, but they are high carbon intensity, but sorry, low carbon intensity, but high, low employment as well. Then next slide, please. So this is kind of to the problem statement, was the specific, was all those in A, and then the few in B that were also kind of, you want faster growth for that low carbon pathway. The next slide, please. So the typology then becomes quite useful in looking at policy in particular. So looking at your phasing out of fossil fuels, as well, the subsidies, as well as your higher carbon tax, you can see then, okay, well, quadrant D, where there's those high carbon emissions, they would see more of an effect, cost base there. So specifically, companies that have been granted these large fossil fuel subsidies are Eskom and Sasol. Then the wage subsidy, that wouldn't really affect them because they have low employment intensity, so it's not going to do much there. On the other hand, a wage subsidy would incentivize firms that are relatively labor intensive, so those in A and B to some extent as well, to induce them into faster growth. Next slide. So then I was able to kind of create an illustrative summary to see the cumulative effects, and I ranked the size of the effect from a 1 to 5. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of what it looked like. So for example, with I grouped agriculture, fishery, and forestry, so similar sectors that have similar profiles together. And you could see that, okay, fossil fuels, the phasing out didn't really make a difference. Carbon tax didn't. Wage subsidy, it would incentivize employment there, so that you can see your overall effect. Same as clothing, textiles, leather, and footwear, but a bigger employment effect. Same as the next two. Next slide, please. And then here you can see these are more high emitters, so you're going to have effects on carbon emissions and employment overall in the long term. Okay, next slide. So what's important though to realize is that you can't rely on policy, but it is very important amongst other things. So, you know, you have these, as we saw in the video earlier in Mpumalanga, where there will be a lot of job losses, and it's people's livelihoods and their lives that are being affected. So it's also having adjustment support measures in place, training, retraining. So retraining, and at the same time training the youth. Sure, thanks. And having kind of utilizing opportunities that are already in the area, so arable land for agriculture, and trying to provide, you know, training schools and linkages with local entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. So there, I kind of was looking into what further research could expand on. One would be obviously to disaggregate the data further, because a lot of it was quite aggregated. So that would be kind of be able to like see in more detail where the opportunities are lying. Then also to understand that other producers and activities sector and where the opportunities are there. Another would be looking at the skills levels required in the sectors, and how to transfer and retrain and skill and upskill, as well as sector size. So for example, you can have a sector that is very low emitting, but it's huge. So it's actually, yes, it's per unit, it's low, but because it's so big, it's producing more than very much higher like carbon intensive sectors that are a lot smaller. Yeah, so that's me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I think just to try and give a reflection of the conversation, I think the first speaker took us through some of the global dynamics around what others have done around climate change, and also what we're doing and what the gaps are in terms of what we are doing locally. And I think my question around that, not for answering, but it's just, how well is what others have done a representation of what we need to do. I think it's always important that as we are learning from others, that we really understand the kind of journeys that they've traveled, rather than a snapshot of where they are now, because those dynamics is really where the actual nuances then come in. Then the second part of the presentation was really around a range of items on how do we then promote this green and also the inclusive industrial development. And I think, as a start, industrial development itself is not inclusive. So you are actually battling to combine things that in their own very nature, they are not. And I think it's important to understand then what are then the strategies for us to be able to marry that which in its own probably does not want to get married. So I think it's a very important item to figure out, because we are actually going against the tide in terms of how the industrialization effort in itself being initiated from a private sector perspective did not necessarily emerge from trying to be inclusive. Now we are trying to make that inclusive, which by itself it is not. So it is a lot of effort. It makes it a lot harder. Then in terms of the second last presentation, really around looking at the SMME participation in the Northern Cape. And at the heart of it, I happen to be a scholar in systems of innovation. It's really around how do we get that system of innovation right to include SMMEs. And as we've already indicated, even innovation itself is not entirely inclusive, but now you're trying to make sure that those who don't have certain capabilities, of which from a market fundamentalism point of view, they will not be selected. We are actually putting a hand to make sure that they are included and that they participate in all of that effort. And it's quite interesting to see that at least that the likes of the CSIR are doing the work to help us understand and then unpack how to go about solving these aspects that perhaps other countries might not have faced in the similar way as us, right? And I think the key aspect also linking to the element of employment is that actually the red zone is on the earlier part of the value chain, right? If we continue to import technologies, right, we are not going to solve unemployment, because then our economy is not intensive enough at such. So it's an important linkage of the last two presentation. And really on the last one, it's how do we marry this aspect of growth and employment? How do we marry the reduction of emissions while growing employment? And I think the key aspect for me there is when you look at the boundaries of your study, yes, one sector might not be carbon intensive, but how far in the value chain does that other sector still depend on the other sector that is actually showing low? And then I guess there perhaps the disaggregation of the data will start to show some of those aspects. But thank you very much for your presentations. We're gonna now go to questions on the floor. Then when we're done on the floor, then we're gonna open up. I'll rely on our IT colleagues at the back to connect us to those online. Please, yeah, we made an error earlier on and we did not quite include them, as we've already touched on the aspect of inclusiveness. Okay, let's get their hands and then I'll move the mic around. We got two. Okay.
Okay, so first of all, I'd just like to say that excellent presentation. I like how everything fit in together. There were some questions that I was going to ask, actually one question in addition to the one that I was going to ask, but because of the other presentations, yeah, I feel as though it was answered succinctly. So for Sophia, so you spoke about climate change adaptation policies, especially with regards to what the Global North is doing. So one of the things that you touched on with regards to shifting from coal to renewable energy, you said that the allocation of jobs before closing down the power plants, they ensured that everyone got a job. So when bringing that into the global south, I don't believe that it would be feasible to ensure that everyone gets a job. So my question is, how are you going to ensure that people's livelihoods are, maintained, while transitioning? Are you going, in essence, what I'm saying is that, is there a number of jobs that you, or a sector that you're going to focus on, and have a selected number of jobs set for people? Or are you going to, as we saw suggested in the video earlier, look into the basic income?
Thanks, everyone. So my question is directed to the first speaker, but maybe also to the other speakers. So I think when we speak about adaptation and mitigation, adaptation is often like to deal with the risks, and then mitigation is seen as a sort of opportunity space. But actually what happens is that there's a double burden of adaptation on many parts of the economy. So not just at the super local scale, but also that actually what we need to do is adapt and adapt and adapt. And actually this idea of that mitigation is, so how do we more effectively communicate that double burden of adaptation through our policy, and also through the way that we then structure, our financial asks or our funding asks, not limiting that just to financial instruments, but yeah, so that's, and how do we, I think, there in most of the sort of jobs planning, there seems to be this like magic black box that is inserted into every plan, which is just, and then something magical happens and then there are jobs. And I mean, I just think like, I'm so sick of hearing modeled job numbers. It's just not, those are not materializing. And we also, I mean, there's just no attention given to the quality of those jobs. And then to, I think just as the person who just spoke before me was saying about this, the basic income grant, I guess that just speaks to a bigger issue of, if the nature of employment that is being produced is inherently precarious, and we see no evidence to the contrary, then what is the role of the state in decency of life and not just employment? And how do we, I mean, it just seems to me then again that there's a need for bringing industrial policy again closer to other policy, and that you can't just plan around jobs separately. But we know that that kind of cross-sectoral planning is something that not just Africa, but everybody struggles with it. So what do we do there?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the presentation. Mine is on, there's been ongoing debates, and I think we've also seen in the video that there are people who are for the just transition, and there are those who are opposed to the just transition. This is because of the job opportunities that are going to be lost if the green economy is implemented, and those who are for the just transition, mainly your civil society, your environmental activists, they support the issue of green economy. But now the question is, having all these controversies and having all these debates, and at the national level, you've got a government which is busy formulating policies. How do we get these policies cascaded to local government, to municipalities? Because we all know that municipalities are facing serious financial constraints. There are municipalities that are owing ESCOM billions of rands. And Safia, I think you spoke about different types of programs that can be implemented at the municipal level, local government level, in terms of just transition as well as climate change. I'm just failing to or I wish to understand as to how are these programs going to be implemented based on the current situation in municipalities. You also spoke about the 8.5 billion. I'm not sure whether the 8.5 billion, is it a grant or is it a loan? What are the conditions thereof and how municipalities are going to benefit from the 8.5? Thank you very much.
Okay, please come to the front. A minute and a half to 2. Please.
Okay, I'll try to keep it to your time limit. Okay, so just to comment on your initial comment around saying that let's look at what we've done at the global. I looked at what we did at the global north. There's a recognition that it can't be applied directly to the global south. I think what was the point that's been trying to make is to say they started. What did they do? Okay, it made sense for them. It doesn't necessarily make sense for us, but there are good things that we can draw from them to say, okay, well, let's not repeat those mistakes. Let's just adjust. I think then that kind of leads me to your question around the fact that the examples that I presented were basically utility companies that were in the European Union that actually focused on, okay, well, as we transition, this is, as a company, this is our policy. I think this is the general recognition that in the global south, you're not going to get that right because one, the company that controls our energy is a state-owned entity, number one. I think that's quite an important fact. And so from state, they've got to make that decision to say, well, we recognize we're not actually going to be able to get one-for-one jobs, but what can we do to make sure that in that particular municipality or in that particular sector, it's not resulting in a distressed economy that we're going to land up with. And you can see that happening in what's happened in Spain. When Spain didn't actually take active policies in place to actually do their transition as their coal mines kind of started being depleted, or they no longer had competitive coal, you saw that without active policy intervention, those areas became economically depressed. And all we're saying at this particular point is that we recognize that we've got to do that, but what are the strategic policy interventions you've got to do right now to make sure that as you transition out of the space, you actually are doing everything from a policy interventions perspective and then an implementation perspective, making sure you're capacitating your local municipality. And I think that's one of the key elements that we always seem to never get to. From a, what are we doing from the local to capacitate our local municipality to make sure that they know what they need to do to take it forward. And I think it was quite evident in the video with the municipal officials that kind of spoke to that particular principle to say, you know, DMRE is issuing licenses, but they're not telling us what we're doing, what they're doing. I think there's a general recognition that you're not going to get a one-to-one to answer your question. And I think it's up to state to actually make that to say, well, we're going to do this transition where we define it as leaving no one left behind, but not necessarily no one will be left in the same state that they were before, but they mustn't be any worse off. That's the best I can answer at this stage. Not an answer, I appreciate that, but that's the best I have. Okay, then onto your question with regard to this notion of communicating effectively, the notion of adapting and adapting, right? That's what I understood to be your question. I think the first step we have to do, and what I found just on the basic research that I was doing, and understand mine is very much from a theoretical perspective more than implementation, was that I don't think there's a general understanding of what climate change is in the first place before we even get to the adaptation. And when I say climate change, I'm talking about at different tiers of government, particularly at local municipalities. They're so focused on what is their current job of basic service provision, which they currently are not able to deliver on in particular instances. When you introduce something as complicated as climate change, they haven't quite grasped the significance and the importance of it, which is ironic because a large portion of the impact that climate change will have will be on their ability to provide those particular services. So I think from a communications perspective, more than anything else, it's first getting the basic understanding of what is climate change and why is it important to you? What does it mean to build resilient infrastructure? What does that mean from your planning perspective? How do you adjust the way you design? How do you adjust to make sure that those principles are brought in? And earlier today, I had a conversation with one of the officials from the FFE, and he said basically they're focusing very much from an IDP perspective to say bringing in your climate change initiatives and your strategies at an IDP level to start explaining that. And I think that's probably your first step in communicating what it is before you even get to, okay, this is what we would like to do. This is how we believe it should be funded. And where is that money coming from? Don't know if it answers it, but it's my best shot at it. And then your question with regard to what are the cities doing? Okay, I'm going to answer the 8.5 billion one. My understanding of the 8.5 billion is that it's either through a concessional grants or through loans, and the cities won't have access to it. It's already been earmarked for basically ESCOM related projects, as well as the research into green and hydrogen, electric vehicles and green hydrogen. And the part of the JET program with the investment plan is to actually outline what those look like, which will come out in November. And that's how the funding money will be funded. The cities won't be able to access that 8.5 billion as I understand it. I stand corrected if anyone else knows otherwise. The point of what I was trying to make was with the cities, with their climate action plans of what they're doing, right? They, well, the three cities that I kind of briefly mentioned was Joburg, Cape Town, and Durban, is that they're actually starting to think about, okay, well, we recognize climate change is impacting the way we start building our infrastructure. And I think with the KZN floods, that kind of drove that point home quite significantly. And the point of what's useful to say is that they're thinking about it, they're applying their minds to it, and they've actually introduced different programs on small scales. And I think the key to this thing, that the projects that they have introduced are very much pilot projects on a small scale. But there's all this potential, and I think that's what I was trying to get across to say, we have this potential to apply whatever new project we introduce. We can either do it under pressure and just get it done, or we can do it and we can actually apply as much as possible the just transition principles that we know about to make sure that that transition is as smooth and as fair as possible. And the projects that I highlighted are the ones that are already in play. The benefit of what the cities have done with their climate action plans is that they have set out an outline. They have a target of where they want to go. So from a vision perspective, at least they're aligned. Now we just need to make sure that they get aligned at a national level. Okay, I don't know if I answered that, but that's my commentary.
Yeah, there was a question about how do policies at national level are cascaded to local government. I think policies at national level need to be integrated to the municipal IDPs, integrated development plans. That's the show where maybe perhaps the municipalities can be able to deploy or implement just transition programs from the national or central government. And one other thing is about training or skilling local government functionaries, because the local government is just the seat of government that is at the nearest to the communities. So if these municipal functionaries can be from the municipal manager to whoever, LED manager, so that they can be aware and be sensitive of the issue of just transition, unlike maybe spreading the wrong message or narrative that there is team just transition, there is team fossil fuel, of which is the case in Mpumalanga. Like when you're talking about just transition, oh, these IPPs are coming now, no jobs for us. So I think reskilling, retraining, and educating state functionaries at the local level, that's really okay. Because one other thing from the constitutional perspective, there is, in terms of, there is cooperative government. There's aspect, I mean, the clause of cooperative governance, and there is a clause of environmental rights. So we need to be able to face those together to see to it. What does the clause of cooperative governance in terms of municipalities does in terms of environment? Because environmental policies or provisions or programs are at the most national level. You can, which municipalities have got an environmental program directly with the communities? It is in the IDP, but it's just window dressing. I think 6 paragraphs on something like that, and then it is done. So I think it needs to be revisited. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, let's check the online questions, please, just so we deliberate on our inclusiveness.
Okay, I've got two. I've got two. So the first one is for Cabanga. So you've spoken about the small scale, but how does that fit into the large scale projects? I mean, are those SMEs growing? Are they getting the opportunities once they've got the training, once they've got a bit of experience? Are they getting access to the bigger projects, or is it still early days? And because there's a requirement for local procurement, are these REAP projects or solar projects, you know, buying fruits and vegetables as part of their local procurement, or are they getting serious support from smaller businesses? The second one is something that Rendani raised about local content. So there can be a bit of conflict between SME programs and local content. I think particularly for the Northern Cape, where local content isn't being set, we're not seeing the solar panel factories being set up in the Northern Cape. And so what is then the view on that? I mean, is there a view? Do we have local content requirements, or are we happy to just, how do we see the link between the small business support programs and the local content requirements? I'm not sure if you've put some thought into that. Then my questions for Nicola, just on the policy implications. I mean, so the move from your bottom left-hand quadrant, your heavy industry, your dirty emitters, surely then the solution is the policy implications is to move them up to the top left-hand quadrant. They're never going to be, the big employers, but we need them as key input industries, and we obviously we want to create the jobs in that top right. I mean, that's the sweet spot of job creation, and that's what we all really want. But we need some of the input industries in order to drive those sectors to grow, but we need them to be clean. So, I mean, yeah, your views on the policy implications, particularly in light of the recent uncapping, do we envisage a scenario where the steel guys start putting up their own electricity generation that's clean so that they can move into that top left-hand quadrant, and then we get the benefits of being able to export clean steel-made products rather than being compromised as a result of CBAM. So some of the policy implications and your thinking around that. Thanks.
Yeah, also I have two questions, and I think they build quite nicely on what Saul was saying as well. For you, Cabanga, it was really interesting to see, of course, the province, getting involved in this. I think it's quite fundamental. But are you kind of looking at different strategies for what effectively are going to be 3 different market segments going forward? You're going to have your SACG, you're going to have your REAP, and you're going to have this kind of private market, effectively large-scale private market. It would be interesting to know how you're planning on navigating this, because as you pointed out, I mean, the province has hosted most of the REAP program so far. I would foresee that the large scale of the private sector market is also going to be in Northern Cape. Certainly from early data, that's the case. SACG, of course, tends to be where you have a lot of people. So it's probably not going to be in Northern Cape that you'll have the biggest market, but you'll have the large scale market in Northern Cape. So just interesting to understand if you're planning different strategies around that. And then Nicola, I think I really liked your typology. I think that was really interesting in terms of thinking about it. One of the things that struck me in your graph is that your quadrant A actually is pretty empty. I mean, they're borderline, they're kind of on the line, but there's not really anything in the quadrant A. And so I think it's quite important to think again in terms of what does it mean, in terms of our economy, how do we move actual sectors into that quadrant A? Because, I mean, if you moved your limits slightly below, or slightly higher, sorry, then you had no one in quadrant A, frankly, besides, I think, BPO, and there wasn't much. So, that's one thing in terms of how do you think about that quadrant and how we bring the economy there. And then, how do you think about new potential activities that are coming? So in the case of just transition, we think a lot about mine rehabilitation and natural resource management. I don't know, we don't necessarily have the data at this level of disaggregation, but it'd be interesting to think about those new activities that we're prompting and to where you would see them being positioned on your typology. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a question for Cabanga. But it's linked to Saul and Gaylo's questions. Last week, there was a new energy plan announced, and I think we're going to see a rise in the private sector generation. And you did mention that for REAP, there was a requirement for SMME support or development. How do you think we can enforce that in this private sector embedded generation thing that is coming up?
So there's a question from Tula Sizwe Zulu. As NAM, we would like to know about adequate public participation with affected and interested people of Komati in Henjina, or reskilling of those poor employees who are now fighting taxi drivers for routes. What about the IDP meetings that have last taken place 3 years ago in Msuka Ligwa? I don't think the question is directed at anyone specifically, but that was the question from online. Thanks.
I think that the questions that are directed to me are more or less, linked to each other. So I'll just give just one answer broadly, and if there are gaps, maybe you should just let me know where I need to fill up. In terms of PPs, currently what is happening in the Northern Cape, indeed, most of the IPPs are located in the Northern Cape, but in terms of opportunity for SMMEs, those are limited to simple services like cleaning and security, catering, and the reason being that the IPPs are very complex, in terms of how they're structured and the procurement of the projects. So it becomes difficult for SMMEs to actually break into the value chain, because most IPPs, they always come with their own maybe subcontractors into the projects. So that has been very, very, very difficult. And in any case, the nature of SMMEs that we have in Northern Cape, most of them don't have the capabilities that match the requirements of the huge projects. That's why we are focusing on the small scale market, where we see that SMMEs have got a chance to participate, though with challenges that need the intervention that we outlined. But we see those as low-hanging fruits for SMMEs to participate. Yes, we are starting at a very low base in terms of capabilities within the SMME sector. That's why we are focusing more currently on the training, to give them the capabilities and the qualification that will allow them to start doing that kind of work. And then there is a question that was raised regarding the market, or the focus of our SMME strategy in terms of do we see ourselves going beyond the SSG market? Yes, we do see ourselves going beyond the SSG market, but for now, still within the smaller renewable services market, which is quite broad, and it includes, as part of it, in addition to SSG, it includes energy efficiency systems and also energy storage. So that is what we are looking at moving to, beyond SSG. IPPs, they are still really far-fetched for us as Northern Cape, looking at the type of the SMMEs that we have got. Maybe in the future, we can look at that. But now the focus is on the small-scale market, energy generation at a small-scale level, energy storage at a small-scale level, and also efficiency systems that can be retrofitted on existing buildings. And then in terms of the role of IPPs, yes, the IPPs are required to make what we call enterprise development commitments, which is a portion of their revenue that they make through the project. We are engaging the IPPs as the provincial department to see how part of that, revenue commitment can be directed towards this initiative. I cannot disclose how far the talks have gone now, but we are engaging them, and the response is positive. Okay, thanks. I don't know whether there's something that I left out.
Sure. So I think the first kind of point that's important is that we don't want to, the kind of your bad in the red sectors, you don't want to see them kind of just completely disappear, because they are integral to the overall picture. But you want to see growth everywhere, but you want to see faster growth in that green box. And you also, through policy, want to see those red becoming lower emitters and higher employment. So that is just using so I see policy as something that could either, it depends how it's done and it depends what kind of budget is allocated. But for example, with the carbon tax, incrementally, so not just going boom, let's make it huge and just kill these industries, but make it so that it makes a difference and slowly increment. And the wage subsidy is obviously going to depend on the money that the government has there. But I think it's important a group of those together is one way in which that can contribute to those kind of those red moving slowly towards the green, so that we become a place where the industries are higher in employment and lower in carbon emissions. And then as for the second point, I think the fact that you don't have many in the A, or that they just borderline A, kind of highlights for me that we need to be looking into new kind of industries, specifically, renewable energy or green hydrogen, those kind of things, and doing research and seeing how those kind of industries can be used, and also leveraging and utilizing the skilled workforce specifically in industry. So from the coal mines to transfer and reskill them into those kind of new different industries that, yes, are very important to explore, because at the moment where we at, nothing is hugely comes out at you as that is hugely a huge employer, and that's where we need to go. It's kind of a bit fuzzy there. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. We have come to the end of our session. I think over tea, we will iterate once again. And to the speakers, thanks for taking the time and educating us. We really appreciate it. And yeah, to the lively audience, thank you very much.